A wild buffalo mysteriously shows up on a remote farm. 3 days later, an ancient path is awakened, and nothing will ever be the same. The pre-dawn silence in the Stone Ridge Mountains was broken by Shadow's persistent barking. The Belgian shepherd served as eyes for Martha Brooks, the 74-year-old matriarch who had been blind for nearly 3 decades. She woke with a strange feeling in her chest, as if the earth beneath her body was whispering ancient secrets. "What is it, old friend? What's bothering you today?" she asked, extending her hand to feel the dog's fur. Shadow was trembling slightly, unusual behavior for such a serene animal. He tugged at the blanket over her legs and paced in circles around the wooden bedroom of the old main house at Clearstone Ranch. Outside, dew covered the tall vegetation, and the sky still held the last stars when hurried footsteps approached the back door. The creaking of old boots on the wooden floor announced Ryan before he even knocked. "Miss Martha, you need to come." The young handler's voice sounded tremulous, urgent. "There's something in the old well, back on the far end of the property." "Something. Or someone, boy?" Martha rose with the help of her rosewood cane, a gift from her late husband Frank. "I can't say for sure." Ryan paused, his breathing uneven. "I heard a strange sound when I was passing near the well, a kind of lament. When I got closer, I saw 2 eyes shining from below." The old woman felt a shiver run down her spine. That well had been sealed by Frank before his sudden disappearance 10 years ago. "No one should mess with the well," he had said. "There are things the earth guards that don't belong to us." With Ryan's help, and guided by Shadow's keen sense of smell, Martha crossed the yard to the back of the property. The scent of dense forest and moist earth intensified as they approached the most isolated area of the ranch, a perimeter she knew by heart, even without sight. "Some stones from the cover have been removed," explained Ryan, placing the woman's hand on the cold rim of the well. Martha felt the irregularities in the stone structure, the ancient moss, the moisture. And then the sound, a deep lament, almost a muffled moo that seemed to come from the bowels of the earth. "It's a buffalo," whispered Ryan, "but not like the ones from around here. It's bigger, more robust, and it's marked in a way I've never seen before." Marked how? Martha's curiosity had been awakened, along with a distant memory. Frank used to talk about markings, about animals that carried history on their skin. "A spiral, with lines around it, like tribal tattoos," the young man described, leaning to examine the trapped animal better. At that moment, a sense of urgency took hold of Martha. It wasn't a coincidence. That animal, that well, the timing of everything. Frank had mentioned something like this in his studies about the ancestral trails that crossed Stone Ridge. "Ryan, we need to get it out of there. Call the ranch hands, and neighbors if necessary, but not a word about the marking, understand? To no one." The morning advanced as the first rays of sun touched Stone Ridge, revealing the sky in shades of pink and orange. Activity at Clearstone Ranch had intensified. Men arrived with ropes, improvised ladders, and tools. The rescue would be complicated, but Martha knew it needed to be done. That buffalo wasn't there by chance. It was a sign, a messenger of something Frank had discovered, something for which perhaps he had paid a high price. And while the operation was being organized, a luxury car stopped discreetly on the road leading to the ranch entrance. From inside, a man in a suit observed everything with the aid of binoculars, his eyes shining with a mixture of greed and urgency. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. The sun was already high when they finally managed to set up an improvised pulley system to hoist the animal. News of the buffalo in the well had spread like wildfire through the surroundings, attracting curious onlookers and neighbors who rarely visited Clearstone Ranch. "Pull harder, boys. He's almost at the edge," shouted Arthur, owner of the neighboring ranch, a 60-year-old man who had known the Brooks family for decades. The animal weighed much more than they had imagined. Covered in mud, it emitted sounds of discomfort as it slowly rose, suspended by a complex arrangement of ropes. Ryan didn't take his eyes off the operation, concerned for the buffalo's well-being, but also fascinated by the strange mark on its flank, which now in the daylight appeared even more impressive. Never seen an animal like this around these parts, commented Tom, one of the helpers. Where do you think it came from? Martha remained seated in the shade of a nearby oak tree, attentive to every sound, every comment. Shadow was restless by her side, as if sharing the tension that hung in the air. Ryan, my boy, when they're finished, bring the animal to the empty stable, Martha called to the young man, and be careful who you talk to about the mark. With one final collective effort, the buffalo finally emerged from the well. It was a magnificent specimen, despite its weakened state. Its dark coat was covered with mud, but it was still possible to see the spiral on its right flank, surrounded by lines that seemed to form an ancient code. What happened to the well cover? Asked Martha when Ryan approached to take her back to the house. Frank had sealed that entrance with heavy stones. No one could have removed them alone. Looks like there was a partial collapse, explained the young man, as if the earth had given way from the inside out. A chill ran down the old woman's spine. Frank's words echoed in her memory. The earth guards secrets that sometimes want to come to the surface. As they walked back to the main house, a car parked at the ranch entrance. From it descended Oliver Brandon, a businessman known in the ET region for his tourism and real estate ventures. Tall, with graying hair and an impeccable suit despite the mountain heat, he advanced with determined steps toward Martha. "Miss Martha, what a pleasure to see you again." His voice sounded falsely cordial. "I heard about the incident and came to offer help. A wild animal can be dangerous, especially on such a remote property." Shadow immediately began to growl at the newcomer, something that didn't go unnoticed by his owner. "Oliver," Martha replied dryly, "what a surprise. You've never shown much interest in the welfare of animals before, only in the value of the land where they live." The businessman gave a contained laugh. "Always direct, aren't you? Well, know that my offer for clear stone still stands. And now with this incident, perhaps you'll realize that maintaining a property of this size alone is an increasingly greater challenge." Ryan observed the interaction with suspicion. He knew well Oliver's intentions to transform the entire region into luxury resorts, destroying the local culture and driving traditional families from their lands. "As always, I appreciate your interest, but my answer remains the same," replied Martha. "This land has history, has memory. It's not for sale." Oliver's smile disappeared for an instant, replaced by a hard expression that only Ryan could notice. Soon after, the businessman regained his composure. "Well, if you change your mind, you know where to find me. Oh, and if you need a veterinarian, for the animal I can recommend someone trustworthy." When Oliver finally departed, Ryan commented, "He seemed to know about the buffalo even before he got here." Martha squeezed the young man's arm. "Ryan, I want you to stay in the house tonight. There's something in Frank's documents in the old office that I need to find. Something about marks on animals and ancestral trails." At the stable, the buffalo was recovering slowly. It had accepted water and some hay, but its attentive and lively eyes seemed to observe everything around with unusual intelligence. When Ryan approached to clean the mud from its coat, the animal stood perfectly still, as if understanding that the young man wanted to help. The spiral-shaped mark was now completely visible. It was like a map, an indication. And as evening fell over Stone Ridge in the old house of Clearstone Ranch, secrets buried for decades began to emerge, just as the buffalo had emerged from the depths of the earth. Night had fallen over Clear Stone Ranch, bringing with it a dense silence, broken only by the occasional hooting of owls and the distant sound of the creek that crossed the property. Inside Frank Brooks's old office, Martha and Ryan searched through dusty documents by lamplight. "Your husband kept a lot of things, Miss Martha," commented Ryan as he opened another box of yellowed papers. The room was a true historical collection: old maps on the walls, colonial registry books, expedition photographs, and notes that Frank had made over the years. "Frank was a tireless researcher," replied the old woman, sliding her fingers over the documents as if she could read through touch. "He used to say that our region held secrets dating back to the colonial period, when fur traders and Native Americans tread alternative paths to avoid the official gold routes. Ryan removed a worn leather notebook from a shelf. I think I found something. There are drawings here, marks on animals. One of them looks like the spiral on the buffalo. Martha's blind eyes seemed to shine. Read it to me, my boy. The guardians of the paths, Ryan began, are animals trained for generations to recognize and follow trails invisible to human eyes. Each mark corresponds to a specific route, engraved not only on their skin but in their ancestral instinct. And there's a map here, Ms. Martha, showing points that connect across the ridge. At that moment, Shadow, who had been quiet in a corner, began to bark, furiously toward the window. Ryan quickly stood up, going to check. There's someone out there, he whispered, quickly extinguishing the lamp. Martha felt her heart accelerate. Keep that notebook, Ryan. Hide it well. Shadow's barking intensified, and soon after came the sound of breaking glass in the back of the house, followed by an unmistakable smell. Fire! Shouted Ryan. They're setting fire to the office. Everything happened very quickly. The flames began to consume the old curtains and soon spread to the shelves full of documents. Ryan pulled Martha outside while Shadow barked desperately, guiding them through the smoke that was already filling the environment. Frank's documents, exclaimed Martha, trying to go back. We can't lose them. Your life is worth more, Ms. Martha. Ryan dragged her to the exterior of the house while shouting for help. The workers who slept in nearby houses woke with the commotion and ran to assist. They formed a human chain, passing buckets of water from the creek to try to contain the flames, but the fire had already taken over the office. Amid the confusion and despair, Ryan noticed a figure quickly moving away along the side of the property, disappearing into the darkness of the woods. He couldn't identify who it was, but he was sure the fire wasn't accidental. When they finally managed to control the fire, it was already too late for the office. Almost everything had been lost. The maps, the books, decades of research notes. Martha, seated on a bench in the yard, had a desolate countenance, her trembling hands holding Shadow close to her. It was him, wasn't it? She asked when Ryan approached. Oliver Brandon doesn't just want my land. He wants something specific that's here, something that Frank discovered. The young handler nodded, even knowing she couldn't see him. Probably. But why? What could be so valuable as to provoke a fire? With the first light of morning, Ryan returned to what remained of the office, carefully rummaging through the still hot debris, looking for anything that might have survived. It was then that, under a charred piece of wood, he found something. Metallic that shone faintly, a small bronze key wrapped in partially burned fabric. I found something, Miss Martha, he said, placing the key in the old woman's hands. It looks like an old key. Martha held the object with reverence, her experienced fingers recognizing every detail of the piece. A slight smile appeared on her tired face. My Frank was always cautious, she murmured. This is the key to the secret compartment in the old barn. He said that there he kept his greatest treasure, something that not even I should know where it was, only that if one day he left, I would recognize the right moment to open it. Without wasting time, they headed to the old stone. Building that had served as a barn in the past. The buffalo, installed in an isolated part of the current stable, raised its head as they passed, as if understanding the importance of that moment. The compartment is under the floor, explained Martha, guiding Ryan to a specific corner of the shed. Under the third board, counting from the east wall. Upon removing the aged boards, they found a small wooden chest, sealed with forged iron, patiently waiting for the return of its owner, or for the arrival of someone who knew how to decipher its secrets. The wooden chest, covered by a thin layer of dust, seemed almost to vibrate with expectation when Ryan inserted the bronze key into the lock. With a solemn metallic click, the mechanism yielded, revealing the content that Frank Brooks had considered valuable enough to hide with such care. What do you see, Ryan? Martha's voice trembled slightly, her hands resting on the young handler's shoulder. They're old documents, he replied, carefully removing the contents. Hand-drawn maps. Some look very old. There are notes in a language I don't recognize, perhaps Native American, and drawings. Drawings of marks on animals. Martha let out a deep sigh. The research that consumed Frank's last years. He always talked about the ancient trails, colonial gold detour routes that only a few knew. Ryan spread one of the maps on the barn's dirt floor. It was a yellowed parchment that showed the Stone Ridge region with surprising detail. Elevations, waterways, specific rock formations. Dotted lines connected various points, forming an intricate network of paths. "And look at this, Ms. Martha," he continued, picking up another document. "A drawing identical to the buffalo's mark. It says here, Guardian of the Rising Sun Route." Shadow crossed the old woman's countenance. Frank mentioned that route several times. He said it was the most important, the one that led to the sacred place where they kept something of immense value, not gold or precious stones, but knowledge. The sound of a car approaching interrupted the conversation. Ryan quickly stored the documents in the chest, closing it and returning it to its hiding place. Through a crack in the barn wall, he saw a jeep parking near the main house. "It's a woman," he said to Martha. "I've never seen her before. She looks young, curly hair. Tied in a ponytail, she's taking photographic equipment from the car." "Let's receive her," decided Martha, already heading to the exit with Shadow's help. But not a word about what we found. The stranger was Laura Wilson, an investigative journalist from a major newspaper in the capital. With a frank smile and a firm handshake, she introduced herself, explaining that she was in the region for a report on real estate developments that threatened historical and cultural heritage. "I heard about the fire on your property, Miss Martha," she said after being invited for coffee on the porch. "Coincidentally, I've been investigating Oliver Brandon for months. He has a pattern. He buys historic properties under noble pretexts and then destroys any evidence that proves their cultural or historical value." Martha remained silent for a few moments, as if assessing whether she could trust the newcomer. It was Ryan who broke the silence. "The buffalo. Do you know anything about it too?" Laura seemed surprised. "What buffalo?" "An animal we found. Trapped in an old well on the ranch," explained Ryan. "It has a strange mark, a spiral with tribal symbols, and since we rescued it, Oliver has shown an unusual interest in the property." The journalist's eyes shone with curiosity. "May I see it?" In the stable, the buffalo received the visitors with an unusual tranquility for a wild animal. When Laura approached to photograph the mark on its flank, it remained still, as if understanding the importance of that record. "This is amazing," murmured the journalist, examining the images on her digital camera. "This mark isn't random. It looks like a geoglyph, like those found in Andean regions, symbols that only make sense when seen from above, from an aerial perspective." "Frank used to say that the marked animals were guardians of ancestral roots," commented Martha. "Trained for generations to recognize paths invisible to ordinary human eyes." Back at the house, they shared some of the discoveries from the chest with Laura, omitting its exact location. The journalist listened attentively, taking notes and occasionally photographing the documents with permission. "All of this makes sense with what I've discovered about Oliver," she explained, showing newspaper clippings and documents on her tablet. "He's not just interested in building resorts. There are rumors that he's looking for something specific in the region, something related to ancient gold routes. Some say it's an undiscovered mine. Others speak of a treasure hidden by early settlers." As they spoke, Ryan observed the behavior of Thunder, the name they had given to the buffalo, through the window. The animal was restless, moving in circles in the improvised enclosure, as if responding to a silent call that only it could hear. "He's trying to show us something," said the young man, interrupting the conversation. "Since we rescued him, I've noticed that he reacts strangely at certain points on the ranch. He stops, sniffs the ground, stands still, or paws with his hooves." Laura looked at Martha, who nodded slowly. "The guardians know the way," murmured the old woman, repeating a phrase that Frank used to say. "Perhaps it's time to allow Thunder to show us what Frank sought for so long." The decision was made. They would follow the buffalo, mapping its specific behaviors and comparing them with the documents from the chest. Whatever Frank had discovered was now within their reach. But the race against time had begun. Oliver wouldn't give up easily, and the fire proved that he was willing to use increasingly aggressive methods to get what he wanted. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. The next morning, Ryan, Laura, and Ms. Martha began mapping the points where Thunder demonstrated unusual behaviors. The young handler led the buffalo through different areas of Clearstone Ranch, while the journalist recorded each reaction with her camera and noted the coordinates on a portable GPS. "This is the third time he stopped at this same location," observed Ryan, when the animal balked near a rock formation at the property's limits. Thunder sniffed the ground insistently, scraping the earth with his front hoof. Laura consulted Frank's maps from the chest. "This area coincides exactly with one of the points marked as a portal in the drawings. Look, there's an indication that the rock has a specific shape when viewed from the right angle." Martha, guided by shadow, approached and touched the stone. Her experienced fingers felt subtle engravings, almost erased by time. "These are ancient markings," she confirmed. "Frank used to talk about signs left by fur traders and Native Americans, indications that went unnoticed to those who didn't know what to look for." Throughout the day, they identified 5 different points where Thunder always reacted the same way. When connected on a map, they formed a pattern that coincided with the spiral marked on the animal's flank. "It's a living map," whispered Laura, amazed. "The buffalo doesn't just know the route, he carries it on his own skin." Back at the house, while organizing their discoveries, they realized they were being watched. Her drone flew over the property at a distance that almost made it imperceptible, but the soft buzz didn't escape Martha's attentive ears. "They're watching us," she warned. "Ryan, take Thunder to the closed stable. Laura, put away the documents." The journalist frowned, concerned. "Oliver must be desperate to discover what we've found. That means we're on the right track." That night, sitting in the kitchen by lantern light, as a precaution, they had turned off the electricity to the main house. The 3 discussed the next steps. "According to the documents, the complete route leads to a ceremonial clearing at the top of the ridge," explained Laura. "There are mentions of a stone star where a waterway crosses the center. It seems to be a sacred place for the indigenous peoples of the region." "Frank mentioned that place several times," Martha nodded. "He said it was a point of convergence of energies, where the sky and earth communicated." A subtle noise in the yard made Shadow raise his head, alert. Ryan extinguished the lantern and approached the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. "There's someone out there," he whispered. He had barely finished speaking when the kitchen door opened abruptly. It was Jake, the foreman of the neighboring ranch, a middle-aged man who had always been a friend of the Brooks family. "Sorry for the invasion," he said, breathless, "but I needed to warn you. Oliver Brandon is gathering men in town. I heard he got some kind of authorization for a prospection in the region, including areas of Clearstone." "That's impossible," exclaimed Laura. "He can't have authorization to enter private property without consent." Jake shook his head. "That's why he's been trying to buy the ranch for so long. But now he's discovered a legal loophole. The property includes an environmental preservation area that technically is under federal jurisdiction. He's using that as justification." Martha remained silent for a few moments, her wrinkled face revealing a serene determination. "How much time do we have?" she finally asked. 2 days at most. They're just waiting for the equipment to arrive from Denver." The urgency of the situation became clear to everyone. Whatever Frank had discovered, whatever Thunder could reveal, needed to be found before Oliver took control of the situation. "We need to follow the complete trail," decided Martha. "Tomorrow at dawn, Ryan, prepare supplies for a long hike. Laura, bring your documentation equipment. Jake, if you can, spread false news in town about us having traveled to the capital in search of legal help." Everyone agreed with the plan. As the others withdrew to prepare the necessary, Martha remained alone in the dark kitchen, her wrinkled hands caressing Shadow. "I'm finally going to discover what you found, old man," she murmured, as if speaking to Frank's spirit. "What was so important that you kept secret all these years?" In the stable, Thunder seemed to sense the energy of expectation that hung in the air. His intelligent eyes followed Ryan as the young man prepared a small load with water and food. "For the journey, you know what we're looking for, don't you?" whispered Ryan to the animal. "Tomorrow you'll show us the way." The early morning arrived with an impressive starry sky, typical of the Colorado mountains. As the first signs of dawn began to tint the horizon, 3 figures and 2 animals discreetly left Clear Stone Ranch, Martha Brooks guided by the faithful Shadow, Ryan leading Thunder, and Laura Wilson carrying only the essentials in a compact backpack. The buffalo seemed almost anxious, pulling Ryan toward the first point marked on the map. The journey that Frank Brooks had never managed to complete was beginning, the search for the ancestral secret guarded in the bowels of Stone Ridge. The climb up the ridge was steep, but Thunder advanced with confidence, as if each step followed an invisible path engraved in his ancestral memory. Ryan guided him with a loose rope, though in reality it was the buffalo who determined the direction. Martha came right behind, supported by her rosewood cane, with Shadow always attentive at her side. Laura closed the group, alternating between consulting Frank's maps and recording the journey with her camera. "It's incredible how he knows exactly where to step," commented the journalist, observing Thunder avoid a rocky stretch apparently identical to all others around. "It's as if he could see something that's invisible to us." "The old-timers used to say that some animals see beyond the visible world," replied Martha. "They perceive energies, vibrations of the earth." Frank believed that these ancestral trails were established following natural lines of energy that cut across the planet. After 2 hours of walking, they reached a small clearing where a spring bubbled up between moss-covered rocks. Thunder stopped abruptly, pawing the ground 3 times before approaching the water to drink. "This is the second point marked on the map," confirmed Laura, checking her notes. Frank identified it as the Weeping Eye, a reference to the spring. Ryan examined the rocks around. Almost imperceptible to inattentive eyes, there were symbols carved into the stone, spirals, straight lines connected to circles, geometric shapes that resembled constellations. "They're astronomical indications," explained Laura after photographing them. "They mark specific positions of stars and planets at certain times of the year, a kind of stone calendar." Martha extended her hand, asking to touch the engravings. Her fingers carefully traced each symbol, as if reading a forgotten language. "Frank used to say that the ancients mapped the sky on Earth," she murmured, "and that certain passages only revealed themselves when the stars were in the right positions." "The winter solstice," Ryan suddenly remembered. "It's only 3 days away. The documents had specific mentions of that date." A contemplative silence hung between them as they continued the journey. The vegetation became denser as they climbed, alternating between high-altitude fields and stretches of closed forest. Thunder seemed increasingly determined in his path, occasionally stopping to check the air, as if capturing invisible signals. Around noon, when the sun was at its zenith, they reached a peculiar rock formation, 2 enormous stones, erected like natural sentinels, forming a narrow corridor. Thunder hesitated for the first time, moving nervously from side to side. "He's confused," observed Ryan, "as if there's something wrong with the path." Laura consulted the map again. "According to Frank's notes, this is the Guardian's portal. There must be some kind of sign or password to pass." Martha approached the rocks, guided by Shadow. She felt the irregular surface until finding a circular depression in one of them. "Here," she called. "There's a different mark on this stone. It looks like Thunder's spiral." Ryan examined the indicated spot. Indeed, there was a spiral-shaped carving, though almost erased by time. The young handler had an idea. He brought Thunder close to the rock, positioning his marked flank near the carving. The buffalo remained still, as if understanding what was happening. For an instant, nothing occurred. Then, a ray of sun passed through a gap in the tree canopy, precisely illuminating the junction between the animal's mark and the engraving on the stone. "It's an alignment," whispered Laura, amazed. "A solar key." As if responding to a silent command, Thunder advanced decisively between the 2 rocks. The others followed him, feeling the temperature drop significantly in the narrow corridor. Upon emerging on the other side, they found a completely different landscape. a valley embedded between peaks with lush vegetation that didn't seem to belong to that altitude. In the center, a crystalline stream meandered. "It's incredible," murmured Ryan. "It's like a separate world." "It's a microclimate," explained Laura. "Protected by the surrounding peaks, it maintains unique conditions, perfect for preserving rare species or ancient secrets." They followed the course of the stream, which guided them deep into the valley. Thunder now advanced with renewed urgency, as if feeling they were close to their destination. The vegetation around became increasingly exotic, vibrantly colored. Flowers, twisted trees of species that didn't belong to that region. "Some of these plants shouldn't exist here," commented Laura, photographing a particularly unusual flower. "They look like species you'd only find in the Amazon or in ancestral forests." Martha smiled, her wrinkled face illuminated by a deep understanding. Frank called this place the Forgotten Garden. He said it was a refuge where the ancients cultivated sacred plants, preserving knowledge that the outside world had lost. As they advanced, they noticed semi-buried stone structures, low walls, fallen columns, remnants of constructions that seemed centuries old. They weren't colonial-era ruins, nor did they resemble common Native American constructions. There was something different, a technique of perfect fitting between the stones that reminded of Incan constructions. "Frank was right," murmured Martha, her voice choked with emotion. "There really was an ancient civilization here, one that knew secrets that we've lost over time." The sun was beginning to descend on the horizon when Thunder stopped abruptly, raising his head as if listening to something. Shadow also became alert, turning toward the path they had traveled. "Someone's following us," whispered Ryan, instinctively placing himself near Martha in a protective posture. "We need to continue," decided the old woman. "We're too close now. If Oliver managed to track us, we have little time before he reaches this valley with his men." With hurried steps, they continued following Thunder, who now practically ran toward the heart of the mysterious valley. Ahead of them, between the opening vegetation, a clearing of impressive proportions began to appear, where the stream widened. And in the center, partially covered by vines and moss, rose a star-shaped rock formation. The clearing opened before them like a revelation. The star-shaped rock formation was at least 60 feet in diameter, with 5 perfectly symmetrical points projecting in different directions. The crystalline stream cut through the exact center of the star, dividing into 5 threads that followed meticulously sculpted channels in the stone to each of the points. "It's exactly as described in Frank's documents," whispered Laura, her hands trembling as she photographed the structure. "A stone star where water divides the path." Thunder advanced decisively to the center of the formation, where there was a circular depression. There the buffalo began to paw the ground insistently, producing a curious sound, as if the stone beneath his hooves were hollow. "There's something under the surface," concluded Ryan, kneeling to examine the spot better. "This central part, 'tis different from the rest of the star. It seems movable." Martha, guided by Shadow, also approached the center. Her experienced fingers traced the outline of the depression. "It's a lid," she confirmed, "similar to those covering ancient cisterns, and look, there are carvings around it. 5 of them, each with a different symbol." Laura quickly consulted the documents from the chest. According to Frank's notes, these symbols represent the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Together they form what he called the convergence key. Ryan examined the carvings more closely. They look like socket fits, as if something should be inserted into each of them. A distant sound of voices and breaking branches alerted the group that they were no longer alone in the valley. Martha strained her ears, her wrinkled face tense with concern. "They're approaching," she murmured. "We don't have much time." Thunder, as if understanding the urgency of the moment, began to move in circles around the central depression, his hooves marking a constant rhythm. Then, to everyone's surprise, the buffalo lay down on the stone, positioning the spiral-shaped mark on his flank directly over one of the carvings. "That's it!" exclaimed Laura. "His mark is one of the keys." Ryan looked around, desperate. "But what about the other 4? We don't have other marked animals." Martha remained silent for a few moments, as if seeking an answer in her deepest memories. Finally, she spoke. Frank used to say that the guardians weren't just the animals. Every living element of the sacred forest carried part of the code. The trees, the stones, the water, everything was connected. Laura realized what this meant. The other symbols must be hidden right here in the clearing. The three spread out, searching frantically. Ryan was the first to find something. A peculiar stone near one of the star's points, with the same symbol as one of the carvings. "I found one," he shouted, bringing the stone to the center. Laura found another symbol carved into the bark of a centuries-old tree that grew by the stream bank. Carefully, she removed a piece of bark that contained the carving. "Another one here." Martha, guided by Shadow's keen instinct, discovered the third symbol in a rare flower that grew exactly where one of the water threads ended at the star's point. The flower had the symbol naturally formed in its petals. Only the fifth element was missing. The sound of the pursuers approached ever closer. "We won't make it in time," lamented Ryan, anguished. It was at this moment that Shadow, Martha's faithful guide dog, approached the center of the star. To everyone's amazement, the animal had a mark on its front paw, a mark they had never noticed before, partially covered by fur, forming the missing symbol. "It's not possible," murmured Laura. "He's a guardian too." Martha smiled, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "Frank always said Shadow was special. It was he who brought the dog to me after I lost my sight. He said Shadow would guide me not only along physical trails but also along invisible ones." They positioned all the symbols in their respective carvings. Thunder's mark, the stone, the piece of bark, the flower, and Shadow's paw. For an instant nothing happened. Then, as if responding to a silent command from nature, a ray of the setting sun passed exactly through the center of the clearing, illuminating the circular depression. A deep grave sound emerged from the bowels of the earth. The surface of the depression began to rotate slowly, like an immense stone disk. From it emerged a stone column, upon which rested an object that none of them could identify at first glance. "It's a kind of receptacle," observed Laura, approaching carefully. The object was a small box, made of a translucent material that looked like crystal but was as resistant as metal. Inside, something shone with its own light, a soft pulsating glow, like a small captured star. "Frank's notes," Martha murmured, extending her hand to touch the receptacle. "He mentioned the light that guards knowledge, something the ancients protected at all costs." Ryan observed, amazed, when the sound of voices and footsteps became too clear to ignore. Turning, he saw silhouettes rapidly approaching along the trail they had traveled. "They're here," he warned, positioning himself protectively near Martha. The first figure to emerge in the clearing was Oliver Brandon, followed by three men of rough appearance. The businessman had a face flushed from the effort of the hike, but his eyes shone with a mixture of triumph and greed upon spotting the small group near the stone star. "Miss Martha," he called, advancing with determined steps, "I see you've made an extraordinary discovery, exactly what I was expecting." Laura positioned herself between the businessman and the receptacle. "You have no right to be here, Brandon. This is an archaeological site, cultural heritage." Oliver gave a cold laugh. "My dear journalist, do you think I care about bureaucratic classifications? What's in that receptacle is worth more than any cultural heritage." Martha, with the dignity that only age and wisdom provide, spoke with a clear and firm voice. "You don't know what you're seeking, Oliver. What Frank found isn't something that can be possessed or commercialized." The businessman narrowed his eyes, his expression hardening. "Frank Brooks was an old fool who didn't understand the true value of what he discovered. But I understand perfectly." One of the men accompanying him stepped forward, revealing a metallic object in his hand. A gun. The tension in the clearing became palpable. Shadow began to growl, while Thunder rose slowly, his eyes fixed on the invaders. It was at this critical moment that something unexpected happened. The crystal receptacle on the stone column began to pulse more intensely, its glow increasing with each second. The light expanded, enveloping the entire stone star in a golden radiance. The golden light emanating from the crystal receptacle intensified until temporarily blinding all present in the clearing. Oliver and his men instinctively retreated, protecting their eyes with their hands. The armed man dropped his weapon, stunned by the inexplicable phenomenon. When the radiance diminished to a bearable glow, something had changed in the clearing. The stone star was completely illuminated, with threads of light running through the channels where water had previously flowed. Each symbol positioned in the carvings emitted a glow in a different color: red, blue, green, white, and golden. Martha, even without sight, seemed to be the only one unaffected by the luminous manifestation. Her serene face displayed a slight smile, as if she finally understood something that had been beyond her reach for a long time. "Frank was right," she murmured. "It's not a material treasure. It's knowledge. Knowledge preserved by the ancient guardians." The receptacle now floated a few inches above the stone column, slowly rotating. From its interior, a sequence of three-dimensional images projected into the atmosphere of the clearing: complex symbols, plant diagrams, celestial maps, geological formations, and other representations that none of those present could completely decipher. Laura, mouth agape, tried to record everything with her camera, though she suspected that no conventional equipment could capture that manifestation. "It's a library," she whispered, amazed. "A living library of ancestral knowledge." Oliver Brandon, recovering from the initial shock, stepped forward, his face contorted in an expression of insatiable greed. "This is worth billions," he exclaimed. "Unknown technology, lost knowledge. I can sell it to any government, any corporation." Ryan, positioned protectively beside Martha, shook his head. "You still don't understand, Brandon. This isn't something that can be possessed or sold." As if to confirm his words, when Oliver tried to approach the receptacle, an invisible barrier stopped him. He tried again, pushing harder, only to be repelled, with a flash of light. "What is this?" he shouted, frustrated. "Some kind of trick?" It was Martha who answered, her calm voice contrasting with the businessman's agitation. "It's not a trick, Oliver. The Guardians choose who can access the knowledge, and they consider you unworthy." The businessman turned to his men. "Hold her. She knows how to deactivate this barrier." But the men hesitated. The supernatural phenomenon had shaken their confidence, and something in the old blind woman's dignity prevented them from advancing against her. At this moment, Thunder and Shadow positioned themselves protectively beside Martha, Ryan, and Laura. The buffalo emitted a deep, grave sound that reverberated throughout the clearing, while the stone star vibrated in response, intensifying its glow. Oliver, realizing he was losing control of the situation, drew a gun from his jacket and pointed it directly at Martha. "Tell me how to access this knowledge, or I'll end you right." "Here." The threat hung in the air for a tense second, until an unknown voice echoed through the clearing. "Lower that weapon, Brandon." "It's over." From the trail opposite to the one through which the businessman had arrived, emerged a group of people, researchers, environmental authorities, and at the front, a tall man with graying hair and stubble, Jake, the neighboring ranch's foreman, now dressed as a federal agent. "Jake?" Ryan couldn't hide his surprise. "Agent Jake Miller, Federal Bureau, Cultural Heritage Division," he formally introduced himself, showing a badge. "I've been investigating Brandon for months. Using the ranch as a disguise was the best way to get close." Oliver, surrounded and cornered, let the gun fall, his face a mask of impotent fury. Two agents quickly immobilized him, along with his henchmen. "You planned this, didn't you?" he accused, looking at Martha. "You knew I'd come after the treasure." The old woman smiled serenely. "I didn't plan anything, Oliver. I just followed the signs Frank left, trusting that the ancestral knowledge would reveal itself to those who deserved it." With the invaders detained, everyone's attention turned back to the spectacle that continued to unfold in the center of the clearing. The projections had transformed into a more ordered sequence, revealing information about unknown medicinal plants, sustainable cultivation techniques, water purification methods, and harmonization with natural cycles. "It's incredible," commented Jake, approaching carefully. "This knowledge could help regenerate degraded areas, cure diseases, solve environmental problems we face today." Martha nodded. Frank always said that the true treasure of Stone Ridge wasn't gold or precious stones, but ancestral wisdom that I would teach us to live in balance with nature. Slowly, the crystal receptacle descended back to the stone column, and the intensity of the light began to diminish. The projections concentrated, converging into a single luminous beam that, to everyone's amazement, directed itself straight at Martha, touching her forehead. The old woman closed her eyes, a slight tremor running through her body. When she opened them again, tears were streaming down her face. "I can see," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Not with physical eyes, but I can see everything. The knowledge, the connections, the purpose." Ryan and Laura approached, supporting her by the arms as she adjusted to the new perception. "Frank was preparing you for this," Laura understood. "He knew you would be the perfect guardian of this knowledge." "Not just me," replied Martha, extending her hands to touch Ryan and Laura. "All of us, each has a role to play in the preservation and dissemination of this wisdom." In the days and weeks that followed, Clearstone Ranch was transformed. With the help of authorities and respectable researchers, the Stone Star Valley was declared a cultural and environmental preservation area, protected by rigorous laws. Oliver Brandon faced multiple charges, from attempted destruction of historical heritage to armed threat and manipulation of public documents. Martha, although technically still blind, developed an extraordinary form of perception that allowed her to see energy patterns and connections invisible to ordinary eyes. She had become the main guardian of the ancestral knowledge, working alongside Ryan, who took over the ranch's administration, and Laura, who carefully documented the discoveries for future generations. Thunder remained on the ranch, free to roam the property, but always returning to the Stone Star on specific dates, guiding selected visitors along the invisible path. Shadow, faithful as always, remained by Martha's side, now no longer as a physical guide, but as a companion on a much greater journey. On a quiet afternoon, 6 months after the discovery, Martha was sitting on the porch of the main house when she felt a familiar presence approach. "Frank," she whispered to the wind. There was no audible response, but a gentle breeze caressed her face, and she knew, with the certainty that comes from the heart, that her husband had finally completed his mission. The knowledge was safe, the guardians had fulfilled their role, and a new cycle was beginning, a cycle of rediscovery, healing, and harmony with the ancestral wisdom that the earth had guarded for so long. The golden light of the sunset bathed Clearstone Ranch, while on the horizon the silhouette of Stone Ridge stood out against the sky in shades of orange and purple. The ancient land continued